Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about understanding child development. Now, human development is really influenced, not entirely determined, but influenced by our parents and our genes. And children may have very different personalities, different strengths, different weaknesses than the generation that preceded them. And the deal is also what influences child development is parenting. And half of the people that are out there that are parents are breeding stock. The other 50% are a spectrum of what one would consider to be a parent. So caregivers need to pay attention to their children's distinct traits and the pace of their development if they want to be a great parent. They don't want to assume the approach of parenting that worked for their mothers or their fathers is going to be successful in this day and age because we're in a way different day and age. The laws are different, even. The expectations are different. How schools operate are different. How people are taught is way different. How people affiliate and make friends is way different. Parents and the home environments they create can also have an important influence on a child's development. In fact, a child's home environment can affect the way that the genetic traits express themselves. If you think about it, if a child is spending their whole life on a video game, there's a real good chance that some of their more primitive hunter instincts and desires to do very primitive things are going to come forward. So caregivers who have consistent approach, who are warm and who can give children a sense of security, generally have the most positive influence on the child's development. Why? Well, when a child is born, the only way they can express themselves as an individual is to cry or to make noises. And so the deal is a child has to pray to God that whoever this creepy parent is going to know how to read my cry. They're going to have to understand when I'm hungry. They're going to understand when I'm tired. They're going to have to understand when I'm irritable, when I'm bored. All of these, when I'm hungry, all these cries are going to be different. It's so the security a child has in the first year of life developmentally is going to be set in stone based on how attentive parents are to the child's crying. The connection between the parent and the child, the mother and the child, the father and the child, if they are safe, is going to determine their degree of commitment and their degree of trust throughout the rest of their lives, because that's when the brain is being formed. There's also, you have to consider, is a child's physical and dietary needs essential? Is that something that the parents are meeting? Perhaps even, perhaps these things, financial and meals and food, are used as a way of abuse or of discipline. If that's going to be a problem, you're going to have their developmental phases get influenced because you are effectively trying to influence their behavior and discipline them through things they absolutely have to have in this life to survive, instead of things that they're emotionally attached to. Healthy development can be upended by abuse and neglect, which may disrupt cognitive language development, socialization. Particularly, it may hamper a child's ability to develop trust or self-esteem. And there's a lot of people that are idiots that breed when they're drunk, breed when they're on drugs, and then their ego says, "Oh, we gotta have this kid." So they have these kids, and they're drunk, and their ego, and their stupid drugs, and all their immaturity, and all their inability to even manage their own life. And yes, they bring children into the world, and then they introduce a child to their ugly life by trying to be a parent while they're drunk and on drugs or withdrawing and all that crap, and they think they're supposed to be entitled to be a parent. They're not entitled to be a parent. They're not even a child. They're worse than a child. But the bottom line is they try to raise kids, and when they do that, they destroy a whole lot of the developmental phases of that child's life because now the kid has to fight for their life even when they can't. The speedy physical and psychological changes that children undergo from birth through adolescence leaves parents and caregivers wondering how best to support them because it's like a freaking marathon. The process of child development includes everything from sensory awareness, to motor skills, to language, to socialization. And parents and medical professionals typically rely on developmental milestones, like when a child learns to speak, or to read, or to walk, or track their growth relative to their peers. And these milestones are important markers, but parents must keep in mind that every child develops differently. So, doing the comparatives of another child at the same age is not going to give you where your kid is headed. Yes, there's some ballpark idea developmentally of where a child should be at a certain age, but children develop differently, especially ones that have sensory perception issues, and that includes ADHD. It's important to consult, all kinds of people, doctors, therapists, and all kinds of other people when we are looking at a child's development. I can't tell you how many times parents are worried that their child is not speaking fast enough, not walking fast enough, not socializing, they're not eating. These are things that kids are quirky. They go through all kinds of different phases early in their life. It's a journey, it's not an outcome. You have to understand that if you're thinking that just because your kid's not speaking very well or has some kind of speech impediment or whatever at 3 years old or 2 years old, that that's the way it's going to be the rest of their life. No, things change. Yes, you want to pay attention. Yes, you want to have all kinds of thoughts around what to do if this is going to be a problem the rest of your life. But the deal is, you don't have to jump all the way in and go crazy. You got to give the kid a time to cook. It's also widely believed that a personality intelligence are cooked in by age 3, but there is no deadline for social and cognitive development. The brain develops throughout a person's life, but especially up to 25 years. The average developmentally, what used to be 18, somewhere around 1950, 60, 70, what we used to consider to be 18 is now 32. These dudes never grow up. Why? Because they have too many options where to take their life. They don't know what the hell they are, where they want to go, who they are, what they want to attach to. They don't, corporations don't hire people for the rest of their lives and retire them. They don't want to retire people. They hire guns and they use them. And the minute technology outgrows the person that they hire, they get rid of them, get other people. So there's no loyalty in employment anymore. So the bottom line is these kids, when they decide on a career, they're going to have to decide on what do I want to be an expert at rather than do I want to work at the factory doing mediocre work for the rest of my life. Children have varying physical and emotional needs also, depending on their age, personality, developmental stage. For instance, if you have a kid that's entering into their teenage years, the last thing that you want to do as a human being is be an authoritarian parent. If that person is getting into their individuation stage, the bottom line is you as a parent need to start giving options. This is what the option, and the option also has to include failure. But let's get back to the younger ones because the younger ones is where we begin, and that's where people are lost. The first year of life, children are totally dependent on their caregivers and closely bond with them if the caregivers are caring, if they are people who pay attention, if they are people who are into what they're doing. A kid reads all of that. Do you really want to be my parent? Are you really interested? Are you more interested in your cigarettes and your best friend and your beer and whatever? They read that. They understand that you may be distracted and you may not be paying attention to them and you may not have bonded with them the way you wanted to. And when you do that, you have to understand in the first year of life, if you're going to have a baby and you're not all in and you're half in and you're more into your own stupid self and all your own problems and all your worldly views and all your whatever that you want to mold them into, like a crazy liberal or whatever, then the bottom line is that if you're all caught up in what you want rather than what they need, you're probably not going to be a great parent, and that child is probably not going to have a great bond with you for the rest of your life. So what you want to do is you want to celebrate your children. You want to give them positives. You want to make them feel safe. That is the most important ingredient. If safety, you see, if you live in a third world country, you're not going to find a third world country learning how to heal cancer or solve Alzheimer's disease or fly to Mars, live on Mars. because they're too worried about safety. They're trying to survive. So survival brains are not thriving brains. So if your child is trying to survive their childhood, they're not going to be of high intelligence by nature, by their possibilities. Now, their brain may eventually outgrow it and figure out how to get out of this childhood with these stupid parents. But the bottom line is, if you're going to make a child survive, they're probably not going to thrive with their intellect in this life. They're going to be more oriented towards survival. So you have to have safety as a factor if you want your child to grow up and have any form of being stable and able to handle themselves. You want your child to feel safe in the world. That doesn't mean that you don't discipline them, but what it does mean is you care about them feeling safe with you, safe with their life, safe with their family, and safe with growing up, and safe with their basic needs being met. What are the key milestones in a baby's development? They make a whole lot of progress during their first year. They develop the ability to sit down without help, put themselves up to stand, taking steps while holding on to furniture, perhaps, taking their first independent steps. And, if you think about it, they can also be expected to display most of the, social and cognitive skills. You know, what you want to look for in a child's development, are they shy with strangers? Do they cry when parents leave? Have they favorite things and people? Do they show fear in some situations? These are things you want to look out for. You know, uh, do they are they assertive? They like hand a parent an adult a book when they want to hear a story? Do they repeat sounds and actions to get attention? Because all of that is going to tell you how they socialize. Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? Do they play games like peekaboo and patty cake? Also, their cognitive and development and communication skills are very important. Responding to simple spoken requests, use simple gestures like shaking their head for no or waving bye-bye. Making sounds with changes in tone, that mimic speech, says mama, dada, uh-oh, tries to repeat words that they hear. These are things that you're looking for in a baby and up to a toddler. You want them to find hidden things easily because that builds motor movement. You want to, you want them to associate pictures with words. Start to use objects correctly, like a cup or a hairbrush. Put things in containers. Let things go without help. Poking with their index finger. These are things that you're looking for in a baby because developmentally that means they are willing to explore their environment. If you think about how infants think, it's very much what you want to be aware of is what they need to have good motor movement. They want to have good language. They want to be able to express themselves, and you want them to be able to communicate. This is a huge part, and you want to teach them emotions and allow them to cry and allow them to have emotions rather than try to shut them down. If you want a kid with high emotional intelligence, you need to let them express their emotions and not try to shut them down. What is very strange, especially in the Pacific Northwest, they want to shut these emotions down. They don't want kids to express emotions whatsoever. I don't know why. The culture just can't stand kids expressing themselves, and then they grow up into zombies as they get older, smart little zombies who don't know how to be married or be kind or love or have manners or care about other people's needs, but they're really smart. And that's not a good thing, guys. You want a kid who has good EQ, and you want to embrace the fact that they have emotions and allow them to have emotions and witness those emotions. Oh, you're upset about this. I can see this is very important to you. Validate their emotions. Cuddling is essential piece of bonding process for parents and babies. If you're not a cuddler, shut the hell up. Keep your penis in your pants or keep your vagina in your pants and don't have babies. If you can't cuddle, do not have babies. If you're one of these, I don't like touching people, shut the hell up. Don't breed. Get out of the gene pool. Leave the rest of us alone. If you're not a cuddler and you call yourself, I don't like touching, I don't blah, 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 shut up. Don't have children. if you're going to have kids, you better learn how to cuddle and you better embrace it and stop being an egotistical idiot, especially with premature babies. If you're going to have a premature baby, they need cuddling. Once again, it's about security. If you're going to have babies, you want them to feel secure if you want them to develop and thrive throughout the course of their lives. You know, touch calms babies by reducing levels of stress hormones like cortisol and lowering their heart rate. Not insignificantly, skin to skin contact with babies calms stressed out new parents as well. There's also no evidence that holding or carrying babies too much will spoil them or inhibit them. You want to carry them. You need to cuddle with them. If you're one of these turds that's not a cuddler, you better turn into a cuddler. And you better learn how to do it, and you better do it fast. It's long been believed that babies are amoral and must be taught and to be helpful or kind to others. But a growing body of research shows that humans may be innately pro-social. So, studies of babies as young as 7 months old find that they are willing to share food, toys, and other objects, not only with parents, but with strangers, even when it's spontaneous or requested. Newborns show empathy, crying in reaction to hearing another baby cry, in the first days of life. Later, they mimic gestures and sounds of their parents and make comfort with them when they see another infant experiencing distress. So, what you have to understand is babies understand a lot more. They understand a lot more and they take a lot more in than you think. It's really important to understand that you want them to develop socially and you want to follow their lead rather than your lead. Babies love to laugh. There are lots of observations, lots of studies showing how babies laughing demonstrates to them that they have a new coping skill because laughter is the ultimate form of comfort. It means that they are able to play, that they are able to understand that they have laughter and when they're sad, that they can go to a different emotion. Laughter is the opposite of sadness and depression. When you have that, it is a form of healing. And it's a very important thing to exacerbate in a child if you're going to have a baby. Once a child begins to walk, they can navigate and explore their world much more directly and aggressively. But it's also considered a major milestone for a parent whose role as a supervisor and protector transforms because you got to watch out where the heck they're going and what they're doing. So the bottom line is your anxiety may increase as they become more mobile, but that means that they are forming their independence. And you as a parent want to celebrate that. That's a very important ingredient of a baby. Once again, the first year of life is critical, and how you parent in that first year of life is critical to the course of the rest of their life. It maps a lot of their brains. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about childhood development. A child's first words are heavily influenced by which words their parents use most often, as well as local culture. In some cultures, a child's first words tend to include more verbs, and others, more terms referring to extended family relationships. Like labeling and naming objects is a more common aspect, especially in the United States. Babies are more likely to learn words like dog, cat, duck, kitty. Large scale cross culture studies point at least six universal first words: mommy, daddy, hello, bye, uh oh, and woof woof. These are good things. You want your child to learn language at a young age, especially as a baby, but the fact is that some children just don't. Some children are slow to warm. And you've got to allow them to come forward as they come forward. What's more important is you don't get frustrated. You don't act like they're crazy or retarded. You want to act like and understand that they're going to develop on their own thing, and you need to be faith-based. You need to have hope that your child is going to evolve. During toddlerhood, this is the next phase. This is 1 to 2 years old. There's a whole bunch of new skills and personality traits that start to come forward. It makes they start making their first bids for independence in that toddler phase. As a matter of fact, at 2 years old, it's called terrible twos. So, the key milestones of toddlers is that they take their first steps, they start tackling stairs, start to run, they begin to undress, they eat with utensils, drink from cups, they throw balls, they draw straight lines and circles. And this is an important thing. This is something that you want them to start grabbing on to the basic things in this world. And what's more importantly, as a parent, you're not a hard ass and a perfectionist. And if you're a hard ass and a perfectionist and one of these people that wants everything just to be just the way you want it to be, this is not what you do with the child. You better be flexible. It's called get it in the ballpark. That's what you want your child to do. And you don't want to guilt and shame them. That's a terrible thing to do to children at this age. Terrible thing to do. Guilt and shame. You want to celebrate their growth. You want to encourage their growth. You want to be a part of their growth. You know, they start to form how they're going to play. They start to have temper tantrums because life is really frustrating for them because they don't have the motor movement to do a lot of things. Sometimes they display fear of strangers. They show affection to familiar people. They engage in pretend play like feeding a doll. They cling to caregivers in new situations. They point to show things to others. They explore alone, but with parents and caregivers in sight. They copy other people. These are things to expect from a toddler. Show excitement to be around other children. That's what they like. You don't want to hibernate your child in your house. We have all these weird psychopath parents who are hover parents. And that's because many kids have grown up as latchkey kids where their parents could give a rat's ass where they were, what they did at any given time in their life, and they had to become adults at 6 years old. Unfortunately, the adult brain only forms once. So if you're going to set in stone when a child has to be an adult at 6 years old, you're going to have a 6 year old adult maturity wise, and they're going to act like that through the course of their marriage and how they parent. So what we have to understand is that we developmentally do not want to turn our kids into adults. We want them to play. They want them to be children. We want them to meet other children. We want them to make mistakes. We want them to learn from mistakes because childhood is experiential. They need to experiment. Hover parents want to control every freaking thing that child does every day of their life. And guess what? Those hover parents get their wonderful children until they're like 40 or 50 years old living in their basement playing video games because they made all their choices for their kids. These kids resent the fact that when they get to their adult life, they can't be adults because you didn't teach them how to be an adult because you yourself were not enough of an adult to allow them to be free. If you want to think about parenting, it's like the checkout time on the back of a hotel room door. I am here to get you to checkout time. That is my primary job as your parent. I want to be your friend. I want to have a bond with you. I want you to feel safe. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to know I love you. But the job of a parent is to get your kid to checkout time, and that is 18 years old. You want to play with your kids. Begin to include others in games like chase. You want to point, they point to get attention. They want to show people what they want. They use single words like no and eventually form sentences in 2 to 4 words. They understand the purpose of objects like phones and brushes and spoons. You also want to show the ability to point to specific body parts, scribble on their own, follow one-step verbal requests like sit down or eventually two-step commands. Point to things or pictures when they're named, including books, and begin to name them themselves. Recognize the names of familiar people. These are things you want to be teaching your toddler at 1 to 2 years old. Repeat words. Find things when they're hidden. Begin to sort shapes and colors. Be familiar with sentences and rhymes. Read them books. Play simple make believe games. Build towers. These are things you want to do with a 2 to 3 year old. It's very important developmentally as a parent to be very involved with your toddler at this age because you're going to catch on to if they have any kind of developmental delays, if they've got sensory perception issues, if they got dyslexia, if they've got whatever, if they're slow to warm, if they're an introvert, if they're whatever, you're going to find all these things at this age. So it's very important that you're around and you're involved with your kids at this age. You also want to know what makes them afraid. And if there's healthy things and good things that make them afraid, that you don't want them to be afraid of, you want to teach them how to make those things safe. You don't want your kid to live in fear. It's very important for them to understand how to be resilient. And so fear is conditioned. And what you have to understand is you are the conditioner to help them understand what to fear and what not to fear. But if you got hover parents, they fear everything. Oh my gosh, that kid's a bad influence. That mother, they said this. Oh, I'm not going to be around that. Oh, they don't. That la la la. It goes on and on and on. And the more wokey they are, the more of a hover parent they become. So we have to understand that this is a challenge. And so we've got to, begin to understand that child development is very important and you have to follow it. Early childhood at about age of 5, you got to expect your kids to display a whole lot of things: social development, playing with others, playing alone. You know, with 3 to 5, their personality, their interests, their social orientation begins to come forward. Parents should keep in mind that personality traits, personal preferences, intellectual and academic ability are not locked in. So if you see that your child likes a certain cereal at 3 to 5 years old, there's a good chance within a week they're not going to want the same cereal that they're obsessed on in that week. They change their mind a lot. So don't lock in with your kids. They are not object permanent. And speaking of object permanent, 3 to 5 years old, even 2 years old, this is where they need their blankie. They need their little stuffies. They need those things because those give them comfort. It is very important for a child to have an object permanent, something that gives them great comfort, and that helps them feel secure in the world. If they don't have an object permanent, you're going to find that there's a lot of fear in there, that there's a lot of fear possibly in their life. Object permanent is a very important part of a human being's nature. As we grow older, we want to have things that are permanent. We want to have the car we drive, the home we live in, the relationship, the marriage, the friendships, the church we go to, the work that we have, the people that we affiliate with at work, what services we offer different people. These are all things that are called object permanence. Kids need to learn that at a very young age because it becomes very important as they get older. Helping kids deal with aggression towards them and towards others is also very important at 3 to 5 years old. You want them to learn how to share, how to care about another kid, how to lead, how to follow. You want to start teaching them manners. Like opening the door for mom. You want to teach them things about saying please and thank you. Openness to learning is very important. Encouraging them to learn experientially is also important. Now, once again, at about 5 years old, they start want to play alone. They want to play with others. They want to please friends and be like their friends. They're more likely to understand rules. As a matter of fact, kids at 5 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, you're going to find that the people that set fair and decent rules and structure, that the teachers that offer really good structure in their class, they may not like the structure, but they're going to like the fact that there is a structure because they know what their days are going to look like. That's a very important component to kids forming their independence. If you have these weird random parents who are ADHD and they can't keep their focus and they're changing how a kid's day goes from one day to the next, you're going to drive them crazy. If you're one of these random stupid people that just, one day you're doing one thing, the next day you're doing another thing, and you're changing up their routines, you are destroying the foundation of what they need to be independent because you're stressing them out. You need to be consistent when they eat, when they sleep, when they play, what they do from 1 minute to the next, what shows they can watch, what shows they can't watch, what they do at a certain time. All of these things are very important components, and you want to stay consistent because that's how they become safe in their independence. But they also do things like singing and dance and acting. They're aware of their gender at this time. This is why the psychopath transvestites, the angry transvestites, have infiltrated our school districts. They want to turn these kids into transvestites because they become aware of their gender, but they don't know really what gender is, and transvestites love to confuse them at this age. So the crazy teachers that embrace the wokey wokey are going to invade these kids' lives right at that age to try to shape them into the lovely transvestite, the angry transvestite, the psychopath that's going to murder somebody. That's what they got to do. They just got to do it. And they've infiltrated our school districts. We're all paying for it with our home mortgages and our insurance. So, it's a lovely thing. So you got to plan on if you're going to have a kid, you're probably going to want to get them in private school because these other crazies, they've taken over the public schools. You also, they want to tell what's real and what's make believe. Displays, independence in and out of the home. These are really important things. Demanding and being cooperative, asserting their needs, stating what they want, stating what they need. But you also gonna have to understand that they need to use their words. But the other thing is, when they're going to throw a temper tantrum, your best thing to do, especially if they're doing it in your car, is to just stop the car and say, when you're ready, we will take off, because you want them to learn how to self-regulate. You also want to use the future tense. This is letting them know anticipation. At 5 years old, this is a very important thing because they use that as a reward system in their life. Okay, your buddy's going to be here in about 5 minutes, or they're going to be here in just a little bit, or you know what, grandma and grandpa are coming at this time, blah 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 blah, or we're going to the store. Letting them anticipate leads them to have more independence because now they can start planning and plotting what they're going to be doing and what they're going to be looking for in the future that you have set up for them. You also want them to count to 10 or count things. This is a very important phase for beginning to understand math. Drawing and also understanding their body parts is very important. Learning how to pee for boys. Okay, if you're teaching a kid how to pee in the toilet, you want to talk to them about being a firefighter and putting out the fire. So aim for the freaking fire. Don't aim for the lid around the fire. Aim for the fire. That's the water. So that these are things that you need to learn to teach your kids at this age. You know, letting them print and show what letters, and shapes. These are things that are used every day. Money, food, starting to affiliate with these things and become aware that they exist. You know, Childhood does not lock in personalities. Early childhood is a critical stage, but the idea that the personality is set in stone is easily disproved by research. Children raised in abusive homes can grow to be emotionally healthy. However, adults who have long struggled with anxiety can learn to change through psychotherapy. You can evolve as an adult. You're not stuck with what you're cooked as a kid. So, young children also have to learn to socialize and share. If they don't learn how to share at 5 years old, you're going to have a problem because when they get to school, they're going to be selfish and they're going to want what they want. They want everything their way. And if you got one of those turtly kids, other kids are not going to want to play with them. They're not going to want to have anything to do with them. So you, as a parent, have a lot of power here and have a lot of leeway. It's very important to understand at 5 years old, your kid needs to learn how to share. And you need to have a reward system when they do that. And that may be just applauding them or saying, "Great job. I'm so proud of you." They want to please you. These idiots that use negative attention, "Oh, you're a bad kid. That was bad. I can't believe you did that to your brother. That was wrong. You did that to your sister." What you want to do is use positive reinforcement. That is the more important thing. You want to take things away. You want to use 1, 2, 3 counts with your discipline. All right, I'm going to take this away. If you're going to treat your sister like that, I'm going to take this away. I'm going to count to one. What do you need to do to change? I need you to say, "I'm sorry." All right, two. All right, when I get to three, you're going to lose this thing. You need to use things like counts to help your children because if you start beating the hell out of your children, they are going to not feel safe with you. It affects them developmentally. I'm not saying discipline and spanking is wrong, but if you're going to spank, you better spank to teach rather than spank because you're angry. If you're an idiot parent that gets angry and spanks when you're angry, you have lost the point. That is called abuse. If you use objects, that is called capital punishment. You do not do that. It's against the law in most states. So the bottom line is you better get a little smarter if you're going to be a parent and be more in tune with what a child needs at different ages. They need to know the difference between aggressive and assertive. Assertive is what you're looking for. That means they use their words, they assert their needs. Tantrums can be enormously distressing for parents, especially when you're walking through the grocery store, because they're apparent of lack of internal logic. Some issues can spark explosions and anger that often continues long after the issue has been resolved. But it's important to understand a tantrum trigger and the factors that keep it going. Environmental issues can play a role. A crowded space, for example, a child can feel they're on display or can drive their stress further. A parent's response to the tantrum can also extend the tantrum itself and create a lot of stress. So when a child misbehaves and a parent shouts, the child can become even more stressed out, and both can become inflexible, fueling a lengthy tantrum cycle. What you want to learn is how to go with the tantrum and how to consequent them in a way that if you keep it up, this is what you're going to lose. Use their commodities. It is very, very important. More than 60% of parents of young children read to them every day, and the benefits are very clear. This is something you need to do to your child. And if your child is shy, you don't want to be bullying them because they're shy. You want to be helping them understand that the world is safer, it's okay to have friends, and you want to instigate putting them in more social situations, but you don't want to stress them out because some kids want one-on-one. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to start talking about school age children after this. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about childhood development. School age kids, that's like 6 to 10, are more independent. They're independently social as they take more responsibility for their social lives, their activities, their schoolwork, their health, their diet, their hygiene, their safety. This is things that you want to have on your radar as a parent as very important skills as a child. There's some kids enter puberty towards 10 years old. Girls more likely than boys. Frequent transitions can be daunting for kids and for parents, but children are more likely to thrive when they're confident in their caregivers and remain ready to support their emotional needs. Emotional needs are very important from 6 to 10 because the child is failing in a lot of ways by some kids treating them badly, some kid not meeting expectations, behaviors are not quite socially adapted, friends are flaky and weird, their social skills can be strange, they can be estranged at school, kids can be bullies. There's all kinds of weird stuff that goes on. What you want to think about if you got a bully is like a dog with a squeaky toy. So if your kid has a bully in their life, the more that they show their distress at the bully's behavior, the more the bully wants to exacerbate the child. They want to go after that child. So it's kind of like a dog with a squeaky toy. If you take the squeaky out of the toy where it's not reacting, it's not squealing and saying, "Don't look, you don't hurt me." When it's not doing that, it's boring for the dog. The dog will no longer play with the toy. So it's the same thing with bullies. Bullies are dogs with a squeaky toy. So if you take the squeaky out of the toy, there's a good chance they're going to move on to the next target. So the idea is if you want to teach your kid to be bulletproof towards bullies, you want to teach them how to not react to them. There's also metacognition that is a big part of 6 to 10 years old, and it's critical for children developing decision making. It enables planning, monitoring, evaluation of their responsibilities, school assignments, and schedules. This is when accountability and responsibility is a big part of life. You need to start assigning chores to your kids to do at this age. Conscious awareness of challenges in math, for example, can lead to better planning. We want to find out what they're good at and what they're not. And just because they may not be good at math doesn't mean they're always not going to be good at math. What you want to do is you don't want to label them as they've never been good at math. What you want to do is double down on it and get some tutoring and try to put some energy into teaching them how to do it. But it's really important for kids to learn that they are ultimately responsible for their own life. Often, a child who works hard and eager to achieve in elementary school seems to slack off and lose interest when they enter upper grades. So it's a normal phenomenon at that stage of development, often driven by frustration with new demands in their organizational and time management, distraction, social life, body changes become a higher priority as they get into their 11 to 15 years old. The effects of bullying also can be enormous on these kids because kids are trying to get their pecking order. They're trying to fit in, and the poor little ADHD and sensory perception kids are the first targets for the bullies. Bullies are idiots. They are people who are very insecure. They're trying to establish their power because they have no power. Usually bullies come from a home where their parents care less about their existence. And so what they do is they want attention. So what they do is they go after all the squeaky toys they can get, and the more that they make you squeak, the more power they think they're getting. Unfortunately, they're also showing that they're a complete idiot. The deal is bullies, if you give them time, if you give them energy, you are going to find yourself surrounded by them your whole life. So as parents, you need to teach your kids how to deal with bullies. It's really important also to keep the school engaged in that and to find out ways that your kids can have an out. Now, if you've got your kid in public school, there's a good chance with 30 kids in a classroom that the teacher is not going to be that willing to participate in bullying behavior and doing anything about it. So you as a parent are going to have to engage the school more actively. You may have to volunteer to be on the playground. You may want to show your presence more at school so that the bully realizes that they're not just dealing with the kid, they're also dealing with the parent. If you form a better relationship with the school and you show up at the school, you've got some reinforcement for your kid. This is a very important thing to think about if you're a parent. Resiliency is also a huge tool that you want to teach at 6 to 10 years old. That anything hard is going to make your life easier. So now we have to learn how to do hard things and how to finish hard things so that you will know how to make your life easier. The more a child learns how to be resilient, the resilient means things don't go their way and they just pick themselves back up and they make it work. Resiliency is not an innate trait. It's something children have to develop. And you, as a parent, have to be resilient if you want to teach resiliency to your kid. So, do you want to raise a kid that you drop them in the middle of a jungle and they can't exist and they end up dying within 3 days? Or do you want to drop them in the middle of the jungle and know that they figure out and they have the confidence to survive? You need kids to think for themselves and to be able to be resilient. You need to find out what their motivators are and how to beef up those motivators. You want to give them confidence. You want to know them to know you believe in them. These are very important things. Guilt and shaming your kid when they fail is the worst possible thing you can do. Stop parenting. Let somebody else do it. If you're going to be a negative asshole to your kids, and you're going to treat them like crap because guilt and shame is all you grew up with, then leave your kid alone. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. Your job is to teach, it's not to belittle. Parents may hope that their children meet whatever definition of popular they subscribe to, but like adults, children differ in their social needs. You're not trying to get them in the social, in the pecking order of the most popular kid in the school. That's not what you want to be raising. What you want them to be is who they want to be. You want to celebrate them as who they are. You want to celebrate and love them for their strengths and the things that they evolve with and the things that they show interest in. And what they show interest in 1 year may not be the same thing they show interest in the next year because they're learning, they're developing their individuality. It's very important to understand that this is a big, big, big part of raising kids. Now, when you've got the 11 years old or 10 years old to 15 years old, now they want independence. Now they're going to understand they've got this new body, and this new body is going to be a new way of looking at themselves. With a girl, she's got breasts and a butt. There's a good chance, or she's, a vagina that's all of a sudden doing something strange. What you've got is a new superpower. And that girl wants to know what that power is and why these people are looking at her differently than they used to look at her. So the bottom line is you have to understand that people are going to look at your kid, and your kid is going to be looking at others and wondering where they fit in this world with their new body. Boys, the same. When they grow their hairy little penis, they're going to wonder what the hell that thing can do. And they're going to start working on their new best friend in the shower. And so the deal is there's a lot going on with these kids hormonally, and to expect them to be what they were when they were toddlers and you were an authoritarian idiot parent telling them what to do and dictating how they do everything in their life, they're not going to want you doing that. As a matter of fact, the more authoritarian you were as a parent, the less they want you to be involved in their childhood from 10 to 15 and even on through that. They do not want their parent as a consultant to who they want to be as an individual. They want to form their individuality. They need to listen to the weird music. They need to have the strange outfits that their friends are wearing. They need to say the strange phrases that their friends are saying. That is because they're trying to discover who they are. Your job is to give them the guardrails. Hey, this word that you're saying is not going to serve you well. Hey, this outfit is a way too suggestive. It's going to do something bad if you keep going down this path. These are things that we as people have to understand, that we have to put guardrails on our kids, but we're not going to dictate their individuality. They may start liking strange friends from 10 to 15 years old. Well, that is because they're trying to push the envelope. They're trying to discover themselves. Now, if they're the kind of lead follower that's going to want to just fit in, and they're going to go into the druggie and the alcohol kids and the ones that are having sex, it's not a great idea. So once again, you want guardrails. That's what parents do. They create guardrails. You want to have behavior contracts for 15 or 10 to 15 years old, 10 to 16, even up to 18. What that means is, hey, you got to do your chores. You got to get such and such as your grades, and you've got to get up and take care of yourself, and no talking back. If you're going to do any of these four things, here's the consequence. You're going to lose your phone for a day. Now, if you do it again, oh, by the way, if you apologize, you lose it for a half a day. Okay, now if you do it again, you do any of these four things again, I'm going to take it away for 3 days and there's no apology. Do it again, it's going to be 7 days and no apology. If you actually don't cross the line on these four things that I've outlined for you as a young child, as a 10 to 15-year-old, then after 5 days, here's your reward. You're going to get to have more time playing your stupid video game or whatever it is. You have to be supportive of your kid. And they can be real jerks when they're going through these hormonal phases. They think they know everything. They want to have their little secrets. You do have to keep an eye on them, but you want to stay in the background. You want to let them be in the forefront and you want them to be center stage so they can form their individuality. This is a very important part of raising kids. You also want your kids to gain some clear benefits from early exposure to computers, to programs that help them learn and read and write. But you also want them to learn how social media may or may not influence them. And so if they're going to spend all their time on their phone, all the time on their iPad, you better know what they're getting into because if the truth is it's not like social media is researched. These are people with stupid opinions, with stupid ideas of what worked for me or what is correct and all that stuff. A lot of these people act like they have all the facts, but they don't. They're dumbasses. There's a lot of those. And so your kids, when they listen to dumbasses, become dumbasses. So the deal is, if you're going to expose them to people espousing their opinions as facts, like the liberal crazy people do, then what you're going to find in the wokey wokies, what you're going to find is your kid is going to not understand the difference between facts and making things up and believing them to be facts. And so you want your kids to understand there's a difference between facts and opinions. And this is a huge thing that if they have to learn that between 10 to 15 years old, because if they don't, they're gonna be naive and they're gonna listen to what other people are doing and they're gonna follow what other people are doing, and it's probably not gonna be good. It's commonly believed that children are born morally as blank slates and taught from an early age. But while parents should do their best to promote kindness and empathy in children, growing evidence suggests that even newborns may be inherently pro-social. And that is what we have to think about, is the idea that all values, what you think is important, are taught before 10 years old. After 10 years old, your job is to teach your kid how to operate in their values, how to use their values, not what the values are, how to use their values, how to be polite, how to be thankful, how to be grateful, how to be kind, how to listen, how to care. These are very important things. And if you're a terrible narcissistic listener, like most people are these days, then your kid's not going to learn how to listen. You better teach them how to listen. You need to teach them the value of listening, because whoever the listener is the one in charge of the conversation. So if you want your kids to be in charge of their life, they need to be a good listener. That's called respect. There's also empathy. Now, empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is be like some idiot jumps off a cliff and you jump off with them and you both whine about it laying at the bottom of the cliff. That's what sympathy is. Empathy is where someone jumps off the cliff and you stand up at the top and say, well, I'm sorry you jumped off the cliff. I've got a rope. I'll be glad to help you. So, you offer them options. That's a very important part of learning, that when other people get into problems, you don't have to buy the problem, but what you want to give them is, I'm here. I understand how this is horrible and I'm happy to help you, but I'm not going to solve it for you. You have to understand that kindness and gratefulness is a huge ingredient as a human skill. People who learn to be grateful attract wonderful things into their life. Even if you are a grateful person and you're surrounded by heathenist, crazy people, and you are grateful to those people for the kindness of what they do or the good things that they do in their life, You are bulletproof because what you're doing is opening a pathway to the better part of negative people. The more grateful you are to unhealthy people, the more they want to be kind to you, the more they want to give you kindness. They want gratefulness so bad. Gratefulness is wanted by the human race so bad because most people don't offer it. And this is a skill you need to teach your kids developmentally before they walk out the door. All right, that's our show. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com or libsyn, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, 90% of parenting is wondering when you can lay down again. And for many, a world of make-believe continues into their adult life. Also, children make you realize how annoying you are by raising